And unfortunately, though, there is always the dark side. The lifeblood of teachers. So let's take a look here at some of my old artwork. I have been, and literally fan art is how I got into just doing art in general. So first you have an entirely gelled drawing from 1999. This was when gel pens were on the rise, and everyone probably remembers them. I still have more.
All the notebooks that have been lost to gel pens.
Yes, indeed. And then the second one is a tribute piece to Jason David Frank, who was here, I know, last year, and I actually created this design for him. And that's all done that started out as like a sketch, but then came into the computer actually. So that's a computer piece, a combo of the green and white Power Ranger. So, when we deal with the legality, first thing I want to do is let you take a look at this. Let's try and follow the roadmap here. So, is it okay to use the image? Did you create it? Yes, then go for it. Did you create it? No! Then let's try and beat our way through this thing. I'm not going to try and have us go through this whole entire roadmap. You have it on the presentation. If you would like a copy of the presentation, there are still some more copies over there. But this actually I love as a wonderful image to kind of help guide you in if this is okay to use, is it not okay to use, and everything along those lines. So let's first start with what is copyright? I will not read this whole thing to you. The only reason I did all this is because when I first did this presentation, I was by myself. I didn't have my two lovely panelists with me, and I had a lot more time, and I stretched this all out. Copyright, which is where all of fan art falls under, okay, is the law that basically covers our right to use artwork or allow artwork to be made in a classroom or in an area where it can be okay. Here we have a wonderful quote on the idea of fan art from Josh Waddles up top, who is a lawyer for DeviantArt. And I'm sure every single one of us knows what DeviantArt is. If you don't, it is basically just nothing but fan art, although there is a lot of non-fan art on there as well. So it says copyright covers the expression of any original work of authorship. This includes the graphic elements of the characters, if they're fleshed out, not just sort of the notion of the character. So let's say if you have a distinctive drawing style like Calvin and Hobbes, they can be the subject of copyright. You can use things that are not Calvin and Hobbes, but drawn in that style, and you could have yourself a whole copyright issue because you're kind of copying someone's style, although that's not always the case. So, it's marking your territory, all right? That's basically summing it up. It's making sure that everything that you make doesn't get all overrun. But in this, we also have some differences. So let's first talk about one of the main differences of fan art. And the first difference is actually reproduction. This is something that we see a lot of times in the art classroom. We're asking our students to reproduce all kinds of artwork. So right here, actually, you have Johannes Vermeer's The Music Room, or The Music Concert, or whatever, I forget. I think it's called The Music Room. So and that's on your left-hand side, I believe. I forget the others. That's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, actually, you see a reproduction that's done by a man who did a wonderful documentary. I highly recommend anyone watching it, whether you're an artist or not. It's called Tim's Vermeer. It's the name of the documentary. I forget the name of the guy, Tim something, I'm blanking on his last name. He actually went through the whole process of trying to figure out how Vermeer did his techniques. And it was insanely wonderful to watch. And this is the result. We're pretty spot on with this, aren't we? So, the idea of reproduction is we're imitating the work of a work of art, famous or otherwise, and we're copying it exactly. The difference when we come to fan art, and this is a lovely piece by one of my former students, is that these are works of art that are created by fans of a work of fiction, generally visual media such as comics, films, television shows, or video games. And they're derived from a series from a serious character or other aspects of work. This is something I enjoy doing with a lot of my students, and I'll talk a little bit further about this a little later. It's the idea of inserting a character they enjoy into a famous work of art. Most fan creations are, by their very nature, not parodied or criticized by the source material, which would provide a great deal of protection, nor are they highly transformative. And I'll go into that in just for a little bit. So the idea that if you're parodying something, you can actually be covered a little bit. Let's think Weird Al. Let's think Weird Al Yankovic, who parodies pretty much everything under the sun. He's covered to a certain extent. The idea that you can be covered from copyright issues, you have to have at least two different categories. Parody can be one, but then you have to pair it with something else, either fair use, education, portion of a whole, like sampling, especially when it comes to musicians. So within the classroom, there are a lot of times when like I said, we're asking our students to reproduce styles that we're trying to teach. In order to meet certain criteria of teaching, we use different techniques and ways to get the end result. Many times we invoke particular artists and their styles so we can teach the students what we would like them to be able to do. We might change the end result, but the students are still copying.
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
They're still copying. So, for example, the lower picture shows several student works that are meant to study Georgia O'Keeffe's floral work. The students had to study one particular floral piece, but then they also had to make sure that certain parts were three-dimensional. It's a little hard to see. I apologize for that. But certain parts of those pieces are raised up using air-dry clay on top of canvas. However, outside of something like this, things are kind of getting a little bit blurry. So right here we have a quote from the Code of Best Practices and Fair Use for the Visual Arts. Teachers in visual arts may invoke fair use in using copyrighted works of various kinds to support formal instruction. That's basically what I was just saying. But this is where things start to get blurry. As an artist, you have to decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not, under the conditions that you allow your artwork to be reproduced, and if it is reproduced, with or without your permission, whether you want to go the legal route. Sometimes that can be to your benefit, and sometimes it's basically just a kick in the ass. So, why would something like this be important? Well, as I previously stated and as we've all mentioned, at certain points we are asking students to copy a style, or sometimes even copy a work of art itself, especially if we might be teaching art history. The artist's right to reproduction is not infringed, are consistent with the fair use doctrine. So the other issue though is what's going to happen when they get out there, when they're starting to copy and they're actually starting to promote their work. We have two main factors with this. Number one is cost, because we have the bigger issue is the cost of going to war with the fans. Cost is everything when it comes to a big name company. Even big name companies like Hasbro can lose money if they're trying to go to war with their fans, because all of a sudden you're going to alienate everyone. And that leads to the second factor which ties into the cost, which is loss of fans. As a company goes to war over the use of characters, they can slowly start to lose their fans, and that leads to a loss in revenue. Many companies have learned that it's probably better to let people do their fan art and kind of just let it slide, rather than trying to fight them. Although there are obviously some companies that are big enough to fight and warn every single person, such as Disney, Marvel, and Rice even has an issue with this. But even Anne Rice has issues with stuff like this. This next one is just a wonderful quote. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it talks about how it's its own perfect ecosystem. You have the creators and owners who want to have the fans. You know the way to get fans is to have them show their love and admiration for your product with your own work. The more fans you have, the better they are at being fans, and the better that your work is, the better their work gets. So it's a perfect symbiosis in this sort of cycle. But that's also a paradox in and of itself. And so lastly, I want to show this sort of guide. This is a kind of unofficial set of guidelines that was published in an article called The Messy World of Fan Art and Copyright. Like I said, while it's not official, it can give you a very good sense of what can be acceptable. I do want to point out rule number 3, which is where a lot of fan artists fall. Being non-commercial. None of us get to follow this rule. I know I don't. This is an element of the unspoken rule, but to try and be completely non-commercial with your own works, no selling copies, no sponsorship, no advertisements. I don't really think I know of a single fan artist that really does this. So, except like a lot of my students, although I know many of them who want to like actually start selling their own work. As a fan artist myself, I do actually go to, like I said at the beginning, I do have my own fan art that I go and I sell. And there is actually ways that you can become official fan artists. I know there are companies like Redbubble or not T-Public, blank on the name, but they might have bigger companies that sweep through and see what work can be acceptable or not, and they might give you warnings or not. If there are companies that say, hey, we actually like this work, okay, you can keep it up, we'll give you the license for it. That actually just happened to me not too long ago. I had a piece of work up for Samurai Jack and kind of forgot about it because nothing was selling. And all of a sudden I get a notice one day saying from Cartoon Network, hey, we like this work, you can totally keep it up there. You are now an official fan artist. So, and obviously there are also contests out there that talk about doing official, fan artist work that you can, again, sell.